we're navigating a world with a coexist bumper sticker, you
Yeah,
know, and
absolutely.
we have to know how to discern between all of those claims because they all claim to have the truth and they all make a claim to reality. And we have to say, but they can't all be true. Logically,
Right.
they can't.
Voices of We is just one of the many ways that we here at Women in Apologetics strive to educate, equip, and encourage women in Christian apologetics. So, if you love Voices of WIA, I invite you to join our free email community where you'll get apologetics resources every week and enjoy email community only benefits like exclusive digital guides and a discount to our annual conference. So you can sign up today by visiting womeninapologetics.com/. Email dash community. So if you are like most people, you naturally assume that you are pursuing your best life, shaped by your values, your talents and opportunities, and your interests. But maybe not. Maybe it's more complicated than that. Maybe all the things that you consider to be you are actually being shaped imperceptibly almost by fashionable assumptions or cultural values or even some false ideas that you haven't recognized, but you have internalized. You are somebody's disciple because everyone is someone's disciple. So, in today's episode, you're going to meet Shanda Fullbright, who is going to help you widen and deepen your appreciation for apologetics and worldview analysis so that you can develop the fine art of discernment. Our guest today knows firsthand what it's like to be in the church, but unable to take Jesus to the world. She was raised in church, but ill equipped to defend her faith for years. Through her weekly podcast called Her Faith Inspires, she takes cultural issues and she tackles them with biblical truth while integrating theology and apologetics into everyday life. She also contributes to middle school apologetics curriculum through online Christian courses. I can't wait for you to meet Shanda, so grab some coffee and settle in because you are about to be blessed. Welcome, Shanda. Thank you for coming to our show. I'm really excited that you are here today because I think lots of our team members have been on your show. But if I'm not mistaken, this is your first time on our show. Is that correct?
Yes, you're right. And so exciting to be here with you guys, with you ladies.
Thank you so much. I can't wait for if our audience hasn't discovered you yet. I'm so excited that they will because I love your podcast. I watch your reels on Instagram and I think you're doing a great job in your space. And so I'm tickled that you're here with us today.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. And yes, you were on my show not too long ago, Lori. So that was
Yes, it
fun.
was not too long ago,
Yeah.
actually. That was really fun too. Okay, so the I think the best place to start is at the beginning. So first
Mhm.
of all, what got you started in pursuing apologetics anyway?
When you say, I don't think it's one thing. I think when you look back and you see just how the Lord leads you, there's a bunch of things that
Mhm.
eventually added up to, wait, I'm not really equipped to answer some of the questions I think I should be able to answer.
Mhm.
And most of it started in 2020. And I feel like there's a lot of people that were kind of jolted out of a stupor or a
Yes.
status quo or just really going through life kind of routine. And then 2020 made us realize, wait a second, what's going on? And I wasn't prepared for this year, this time. And so we were living in California, my husband and my boys and I,
Mm.
and so they were in the public school system. I'm a former public education teacher in California. They were in the same school district as me. So what's funny is that we all went to the same location every day, the same campus with
Yeah.
the same people, the same teachers. But when the iPads came into the home and the kids were on lockdown, the ideologies came into the
Huh.
home. And I was like,
Yeah.
"Wait a second, I work with these people. I've shown up to the same school, we've had the same curriculum." And all of a sudden, my boys were being bombarded with ideologies. And then my oldest was around 15 or 16 at the time, and he started having doubts, and I'm just not sure I believe in God for myself. I need to know. And really,
Mm.
when your kid tells you that, you're like, okay, I've got to do something. And in the
Yes.
same year, I don't know if you remember the lead singer from Hawk Nelson, that
Yes. Yes.
band. He came
Oh,
out
yeah.
that year and
Yes. I do
basically
remember that.
said, "I'm a pastor's kid, I was raised in church, and I'm leaving Christianity, and actually I've left it for the last couple of years, but I needed to keep my job. I needed some money, so I kept singing these songs,
Yeah.
and my husband and I were on our way to go on an anniversary trip, and all we could do was camp because everything was closed down, and we were listening to this news, and my husband like, "Oh my gosh, like, this guy's been raised in church, and he doesn't even know, like,
Yeah.
why a good God would send people to hell," all these, and then we thought, "Well, let's see if we could answer that question." And when we started to really try to think through how we would answer it, we realized if it was up to us to keep, I think his name was John Starnes, to keep him in the church, and he came to me to say, "Hey, I need an answer for this." I don't know that I would have kept him. I don't know if I would have given him a reasonable
Yes.
answer to keep him. So
Yeah.
that 2020, my boys being bombarded, the doubt from my oldest, it was just, wait a second, we aren't really as, and I don't want to say intelligent, knowledgeable, smart. We're just not really where we need to be with our Christian faith. We
Sure.
don't know how to defend it. I wasn't struggling with my own faith crisis. I
Yeah.
just didn't have the answers that people needed me to have. And so we went online and started researching, and we didn't stop, and here we are. And here we are
Yeah.
as a family. Here I am as an individual with a podcast
Yeah.
and
It's an
diving
amazingly large, I don't wanna use the word pit because that has a negative connotation to it, but when you start studying apologetics, it's hugely broad. I mean, once you kinda get in it and you enjoy the process of learning and answering questions, I mean, there's just a million different directions you can go, and so most
in.
of us who get in it are stuck. Once we get there,
Yes.
we're stuck in it because there's just so much to do and so much to think about. But I think it's interesting, I wanna go back, if you don't mind. You were in as a teacher, you were in the public school system,
Mhm, mhm.
and you
Yes.
didn't
Mhm.
necessarily see the ideologies that were happening in the school system until until you saw it, through your kids. Is that basically, do I have that right?
Yes, yes, exactly. And that's what's really unique about, I think, my experience is that I always said, and my father-in-law had, even from the time I became a teacher, he was like, "It's the system isn't set up right. The system isn't good." And I'm like, "But there are good teachers out there. I know this because I
Sure.
work with them." So I would always defend it. But what I mean by that is it's not that there aren't ideologies embedded into the system and the way that it works.
Yeah.
But if you get a teacher who doesn't have an agenda, like I didn't teach my kids anything ideologically controversial. And
Right.
there were other teachers who didn't either, but then there were teachers who did. And so
Okay.
with any public education system, you can go onto the state's public education website, and you can look at the state standards for your child's grade level. And the state standards are not extremely specific in some ways. Like, for example, this is the best way that I can explain how teachers could get away with teaching and embedding an ideology into a standard is that when my youngest was in the fifth grade, the teacher who took my place was in my classroom teaching my grade level, fifth grade, the year after I left. And that was my son's, the grade that he was in. And she taught him theme, but she taught him gender ideology through a
Mhm.
book called
Mhm.
Julian is a Mermaid, I think it is. And so he was in my office listening to the book on the iPad, and I wasn't paying attention. He came to me after the class was over and said, "Mama, look what my teacher read me today. It was about a little boy who wanted to be a mermaid." And then immediately I perked up at that time. I Googled it, and I'm like, "What in the world? This is not a state standard. She shouldn't be teaching this. This is the same grade I've been teaching for years." And I contacted her, and she's like, "I'm just teaching theme. I just wanted the kids to know that there are differences in the world." And so I taught theme every year, but I might teach theme with a different set of literature, with a
Yeah.
different idea embedded into the text. She
Yeah.
did the same thing, but through an ideology. And so
Yeah.
that's what
Sure.
was coming at us. I have 3 boys in school, and it was coming at us like rapid fire that year. It was
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely would be. And I don't know how much you have looked into the history of public education, but that has been interesting to me because I was a public school kid too. My kids were raised
Mhm,
in public school when they were little. When in elementary school, we changed after that for different reasons. But there are significant people in the history of American public education that specifically were secular humanists, committed secular humanists, and they really did see an open door to teaching something that was essentially uh, anti-Christian. It would more or less replace Christianity. Now,
Mm.
you and I would not think of that, and no,
Right.
most people wouldn't consider that. But it kind of becomes ultimately just a matter of time before that kind of ideology seeps in, just like you were talking about, unaware.
Mhm.
And when it does, I think it's amazing that our kids are really the ones coming to us saying, "I'm having doubts." None of us did. I mean, maybe
Right.
little ones here and there, but certainly not life changing,
Mhm.
walking away from your family of faith, don't want this anymore. That didn't happen so much when you and I were growing up, and I really do
Mhm.
think that it's a lot because it like you say, it kind of gets embedded into the curriculum, and not
Mhm.
even just public schools, but really it can happen anywhere. Just because
Yeah.
secularism is so prevalent in our society and has been for so long, those ideas are fundamentally opposed to biblical Christianity, and so we that it's really not a surprise that we see it happening with our youth so much more. So that I'm sure it was for you kind of got you started toward apologetics education
Mhm.
specifically for young people, because most of us as parents don't know we need apologetics until
Mhm.
we need it, until it's right in our
Right.
lap. So how did you get
Yes.
started specifically working on apologetics for kids and young adults?
Well, my philosophy is everybody needs the basics, and usually the reading level of well, the average reading level of the American adult is 6th grade, arguably 7th, maybe 8th if you're lucky. But everybody reads about a middle school level. So what I try and do is break the apologetics curriculum down to a level in which anybody like me who was just learning it can understand the basics of it, and then go ahead and let's add the cosmological argument and these deep scientific truths and things that we can compound onto that. But I got into it because, for one, I'm a teacher. Like I said, I
Mhm.
went through the credentialing program with California,
Sure.
and as I'm learning apologetics, I see we all need to learn this. We all
Yeah.
need to build apologetics onto the foundation of biblical truth. And my
Yeah.
mom, growing up in the church, she really emphasized a high view of scripture, which I'm so grateful that she did. And for
Mhm.
that reason, I feel like apologetics was easier for me to learn. It was easier for me to
Oh,
attach those truths to the biblical concepts. But
okay.
what I started to see is getting into apologetics, I started to see that many in the church don't have the biblical foundation. And
Yeah.
I started to study the statistics by George Barna, who says the majority of Americans still claim to be Christian. But if you're paying attention, you can see that if that were true, we wouldn't have the abortion rates that we do. We wouldn't have
Sure.
the acceptance of homosexual marriage if that were true. And what I mean by true is if we truly lived what we believed, what we claim to believe anyways, we would see a
Mhm.
different view of these things in culture. And so I thought something's missing in the church, but there's no way for me to assess that as a teacher because when I would get my students, I would always assess them to see what do they know now and what I need to
Mhm.
teach them by the end of the year. So how do you do that for the big C church in the West, right?
Yeah.
Well, George Barna does that for us. George Barna gives us that assessment and says, here's what the American Christian says. They're coming into us and they're saying, I'm a Christian. I believe in the doctrines of Christianity. However,
Yeah.
they're testing out as not holding up to that. They're
Yeah.
saying they do, but they don't. Many of them, 70 something percent, I think 74% of those who claim to be Christians believe in karma. And so it's mostly a syncretized worldview.
Right.
And so I realized, like, we need apologetics in the church as well, but we have to build that upon a biblical foundation. And so I just like I said, my family was diving into apologetics. I'm seeing this need, this educational need as well. And I start to think, how will I help the other average families like me and my family in the church to at least know what they believe and be able to answer their kids' questions and be able to send their kids out into the world and not be afraid that they're gonna just break down everything that you've
Yeah.
instilled into them. And so when I got into apologetics, I signed up for the Cross Examined Instructors Academy. I went 2 years in a row and got in. I took some online Christian courses myself because I was taking cold case Christianity and Romans and how to study your Bible and a gamut of things. Got my certificate from Biola, and all within like a year, year and a half. I mean, it was like
Yeah.
acceleration. And then I started working for online Christian courses, and Dr. Frank Turk and his wife Stephanie said, "Hey, you're a former public education teacher. Can you take I don't have enough faith to be an atheist and break that concept down to like middle school level and start teaching middle schoolers?" And I was like, "This is the best thing ever because this is what I do." And so we make our curriculum available, even though it's middle school, we make it available for those who say, I just don't even know where to begin. Like, if you're going to drown me in to the scientific evidence for God, like I need a basis to start.
Yeah.
And so that's why we make that available. Cause like I said, if people are learning and the average reading level is middle school, we want to make apologetics available for everybody. When I
Right.
was first introduced to apologetics, which I don't even know if I understood what it was called at the time,
Yeah. I
it was
didn't.
Ravi Zacharias on the stage,
Yeah.
profoundly blowing my mind and,
Yeah.
talking to people out in the audience. I'm like, "Okay, he's a genius, and I'll never be able to do that." And so for me, I like to think, "Well, if I can do this, then
Yeah.
you can too, and let's just make
Yeah.
it readily available for us to just not be these experts who are debating atheists, because that is not my goal, but moms who are preparing our kids and being able to take it to our church women's groups and live it
Yes.
in real life and
Yes.
be faithful to the Lord and where we are. And that's kind of how it all got started.
Yes, I totally agree. In fact, I really identify with what you said about, realizing, sort of waking up to that moment that something was missing in the church, that we should be able to do this. No, clearly, nobody has any problem with pastors and youth pastors and Sunday school teachers teaching the content of the Bible and how to live according to the content of the Bible and going through books and verses and memorizing scriptures, because all of that is necessary as a foundation, like you said. But in my opinion, there's this whole aspect of discipleship that is missing, which is apologetics. I really think we're at the spot, honestly, we've been there for a really long time. We're at the spot where we need to be considering apologetics as just the other half of discipleship. So what we typically see in Sunday school is, devotional or daily discipleship, how to live, sanctification, how to live as a Christian. But we need the other half of discipleship, which teaches us pretty much how to understand why this all matters in the first place.
Yeah.
Why does it matter if I understand my doctrine? Why does it matter if I understand Jesus' commands and live them out or don't live them out? I mean, he forgives us anyway, right? So why is sin a big deal? Well, we need to know because these things are true. That's why it matters. And
Mhm.
so I'm a really big proponent of seeing and teaching apologetics as just the flip side, the other side of the coin to discipleship, was just two
Amen.
different
Yes.
kinds of discipleship, more or less. One teaches you how to
Yes.
love, and the other teaches you why you need to take it seriously. And so I'm right there with you on that, and especially women. I have such a soft spot for women because our mission field for a long time is in our back seat. And if we
Mhm.
don't know how to answer those questions before the questions get asked, it doesn't mean that we can't go find the answers on the fly. We can. It's just, I think it's just easier for most of us if we have prepared for that and we can have those conversations a little more naturally. Um, and also, you said something else I think that's really important is that worldview and apologetics allows us to discern the messages that we or our kids, and ultimately they'll have to do it for themselves, are getting that are essentially unbiblical. Like you said,
Mhm.
there's so many Christians who believe in karma, or they believe in reincarnation, or they believe in several other
Yes.
things that are clearly not acceptable within a Christian worldview. And I think that gift or that art or the skill, I think is probably a better word, of discernment is crucial, don't you?
Oh gosh. Yes. Discerning we discern, by the way, more than just right and wrong. We
Right.
discern,
Yes.
in the morning, what do I need to wear today? Because the weather outside may be cold, may be warm. I'm discerning, I'm judging between
Yes.
these, clothing or whatever. It is, and if we have the Holy Spirit, and we do upon salvation, then we have him to help us. But that again, I don't want to make that sound like it's an automatic default to understanding what is right and wrong, what's true or false.
No.
because we
Sure.
have to do. God gave us a mind for a reason, and so
Yes.
you're absolutely right. And I believe apologetics and worldview itself, just understanding a little bit about the backgrounds of other worldviews and what they claim to believe is helpful in this endeavor. Is helpful, and we're navigating a world with a coexist bumper sticker,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
we have to know how to discern between all of those claims because they all claim to have the truth and they all make a claim to reality. And we have to say, but they can't all be true. Logically,
Right.
they can't. So,
And
yeah.
that's one of the things we have to discern too is that so many of the messages say it just pick your favorite. It doesn't matter which one you embrace. Figure out which one you like. If figure out which one seems to express your current state of thought or feeling or whatever, and just do that because they're all the same. Well,
Mhm.
that itself requires discernment. If you've been impacted by Voices of WIA or any of the resources that we provide, would you consider partnering with us through a monthly gift? Your support helps us continue this very vital work and reach even more women with the tools that they need to stand firm in their faith. I personally support WIA because there aren't enough women's ministries that keep the focus on truth, and I'd love for you to join me by visiting womeninapologetics.com/donate. I wonder if you could help us because I think this is so crucial. This is so important for especially for our moms, but really all Christians need this skill, whether we're moms or not. That there are implications to worldviews, and can you help our audience understand that each different worldview then connects the dots in different ways, and those
Mhm.
different ways are substantial.
Yes.
I'm assuming you would agree with that statement,
Absolutely. The thing about a worldview is, I say you can make things basic. So let's just put it into its most basic form. Every worldview makes a claim about reality, about what's true.
right?
And they
Yes.
all answer those basic questions. And that first question, origin, how did I get here, is the most crucial question. And
Yeah.
why I say that is because if you get it wrong, every question after that is incorrect. The question of identity is incorrect. The question
Yes.
of where am I going? What happens
Yes.
after I die? How do I live? All that. So let's just go to the first question of origin. How did I get here? Every religion, every worldview says something different about that first question. They answer it differently.
Mhm.
We say the God of creation is the reason that we're here. Well, okay, well, there's only two other worldviews that would be similar to that. That's Judaism and Islam. Every
Mhm.
other worldview or world religion is going to say, we're all here because of naturalism. That's more of the atheists will say that.
Yes.
Marxists will say that. And then you have someone who says the universe, we're all here of cosmic consciousness and everybody's part of
Yes.
this big, thing. So you have different people will answer or worldviews will answer it differently. But we know that even with Judaism and Islam, just those 2 who answer, I think, similarly because they do believe in the God of creation, spoke the world
Right.
into existence and things like that. The difference between the Christian God and just the Muslim God is the fact that we can call God Father, that Jesus invited us to call God, the God of creation, the God of heaven and earth, Father, when he said, "This is how you pray, our Father which art in heaven." Before
Yes.
that, they weren't invited to call him father. It was different. Jesus came to make sure that we had a right relationship with the Father. And so it's blasphemy in Islam to refer to God as Father. Okay, so automatically now you have to say, going back to the bumper sticker, because this is what I'm doing with my middle schoolers. Let's look at that bumper sticker. Coexist. Can we coexist means to exist at the same time. Yes, we can. We should. We want to. But we should also discuss the fact that what that also implies is that we all should just go along to get along and don't say to that person you're wrong. They can't say that I'm wrong. We'll all just pretend that each other is can believe what we want with no repercussions or consequence.
Right.
That's the dangerous part because
Yeah,
what happens
absolutely.
is what I believe about that origin question
Yes.
determines what I believe about you and whether or not if you're created in the image of God because the God of creation made us into his image, then I'm going to value you even if you don't agree with me. But if
Sure.
it's a naturalist worldview where we're all just here by random chance, you have no inherent value anymore.
Nope.
and that's how
Right.
you get the genocides and the terrible destruction of the 20th century. So, because most of those leaders were all Marxist dictators and or
Right.
socialists with Hitler, and millions and millions of people were destroyed based upon skin color, beliefs, and
Right.
ideologies. And so that's
Right.
just a very basic, very small part of worldview. But at the same time, I think it's good for us to understand, are there consequences to the worldview questions? Yes. But if you can't
Yes.
get one right, none of the rest really matter.
Yes, and they're all unavoidable. These are that's the part that I think a lot of people don't understand. They want to assume that we can just, like you say, we can all just coexist peacefully with, despite the fact that those beliefs are going to lead to radically different assumptions about value, radically different assumptions about how you should live or should not live, and eventually it causes us all to clash. And
Mhm.
so if we see that coming, then we can deal with the clashes. We can, have the discussions. We can present the evidence. We can persuade one another, in order that we can actually arrive at some place of true unity and true truth. Because
Mhm.
truth ultimately is a unifier. If all of us really are about truth, truth will end up being a unifier. And so that's a really important thing for people to recognize, is that we all want to get along despite our differences, but those implications of each worldview eventually lead to conflict. And so there has to be some way to work that out. And that's right where Jesus left us, is go and make those disciples, because
Mhm.
that's going to help, mitigate the conflict and all. And that's an important part of our discipleship, is understanding not only the implications for Christians and Christian living, but I think it's equally important, that Christians understand the implications of non-Christian worldviews. Don't you?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. What I tell my students too is, because when you look at worldview, it can get overwhelming, right? Because you're like, do I have to be an Islam expert to know how to,
Right.
have these
Right.
conversations?
Yeah. Or an
And
expert in everything. Do I have to figure out how to
yes,
be an expert in
exactly.
everything else? Yeah.
Let me read the new age books, you're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed." But the number one rule, and I think this goes back to George Barna's statistics, which the church, and I know that there's other, maybe surveys and statistics out there, but I'm telling you, he's like one of the best. And the church owes a great gratitude to what George Barna
Yes.
does to give us insight into where we are. Because if you
Yes.
have your finger not just on the pulse of culture, but on the pulse of the church, we know what we know and what we need to know. And the first and foremost, the most important thing is to know what you believe. If you claim to be a Christian, that is your
Yeah.
responsibility to be an expert in that thing.
Yes.
So I expect somebody who tells me, "Well, I'm a Muslim, tell me about it." Then I expect them to be an expert because they say they believe it. That means you've done your homework. You've looked into it. You know what those core doctrines and those core principles are, and you stand on them. And so
Mhm.
if we claim to be a Christian, the first thing we should know is what we say we believe, and we need to know why we do. So because you want to defend what you believe. My family, who's not into apologetics but also raised me in church, they get offended somewhat when you say that you defend Christianity, that apologetics is the defense of the faith. Well, God
Yeah.
doesn't need to be defended, they say. No, but your belief in him does, because you live in a world with opposing worldviews and claims.
Right.
So
Right.
you must do that for the other people who need you to say why you believe what you do.
Yes.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is, if you know the what the Bible says, and you understand Christianity and those core principles, and then we hear something unfamiliar, like what goes around, if you put in positivity, you'll get back positivity. Wait a second. I'm not sure if that makes sense. Does that add up? We need to know where those claims are coming from, because you, like
Yeah.
you said, it helps us understand the implications of the person, that worldview of the person we're talking
Sure.
to.
Sure.
And there are so many times, Lori, that I'll be on YouTube and I'll post something, and if by the pushback, I can tell. I'll ask, "Are you a progressive Christian? Are you Catholic? Are you, whatever?" Because I can tell by what they're
Yes.
pushing back on and how they're asking me.
I
I know
totally
now
agree
where
with
they're
that.
coming from. Yes. So now it's like, okay, I get that, but that comes with a little bit of time, and I don't want to pressure the listener to say you have to go study every worldview. But I do recommend at least looking into what George Barna says about what Christians, how they're syncretizing their
Yes.
Christianity. And most of it is coming from the new age. We are adopting
Yes.
feel good
I
religion.
agree.
meology and the positive vibes. And I mean, there is just some crazy stuff out there
Yeah.
that Christians claim. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, help us, Lord. And so I recommend, I highly want to stress the fact that be an expert in what you say you believe. And that means not just knowing what and claiming it, it's knowing why and living it, because that is the biggest impact we can make. And then when we hear something, go find out where that comes from. Because if your kid comes and asks you a question and you say, I have to go research that, the likelihood of you having to research it more than once is very slim. You'll know it forever now. You'll have
Yeah.
that knowledge now
Yeah.
for the next conversation. And all you're going to do is keep building. So when something
Yes.
doesn't sound right, you say, well, let me figure this out. Let me see where it's coming from. Then you say, oh, karma is new age, new thought, whatever it's linked to in that whole bucket of the spirituality. And then you could say, "Oh, I know where that's coming from now." And you
Yeah.
don't have to keep learning it. You probably
Yeah.
have only had to research it once, and now you've got that knowledge. And
Yeah.
eventually it all compounds and you start to feel like, wow, this is starting to be familiar. I'm starting to get this. I'm starting to recognize where people are coming from. And it
Yes.
just makes you grow. That's one way the Lord grows us in this world that we're living in.
I totally agree. Because people ask me all the time, why is apologetics important? And it's kind of sometimes it can be hard to summarize it because it's not like we're drilling a water well or providing an orphanage or doing kind of service things like that. But the growth there in being able to essentially at some point be able to have a conversation with somebody because you already know which set of beliefs goes in which bucket, so to speak, that when you're talking to somebody, it's you're not ever starting over all the way at zero again. So you have some sort of you have a foundation to start on, and it makes those conversations a whole lot easier than when you just don't know at all, when you don't have any experience with at all. And we have to wrap up, but before we go, you had mentioned something about using Daniel 1 as to kind of demonstrate the concept of worldview discipleship and how we can do it better. So let's just take a few minutes for you to explain that for our
Okay.
listeners because I think that will be very valuable for them.
Usually when people see discipleship, it's kind of discipleship here and worldview formation here. What I
Right.
started to see as I'm studying is that if everybody has a worldview and a worldview is formed by the time somebody's 13, which is what George Barna tells us, then you're being conformed to a worldview. So that means discipleship is crucial. So that way you are giving your child or your student a biblical worldview. And it's really easy when we think of the word disciple. I mean, somebody's mind, a Christian's mind's going to go to Jesus. Even those outside the church, their mind's going to go to Paul, Jesus, one of Jesus's 12 that followed him. But discipleship is just another way to develop somebody's worldview, regardless of whether or not it's a biblical one. So when you look at
Yeah.
Daniel 1, we see a great example of an unconventional disciple maker in Nebuchadnezzar because he embedded the components of
Yeah.
discipleship into his program. He was
Yes.
intentional with his students. He chose ones that he could
Yes.
indoctrinate and to form their minds to the ways of the Chaldeans and the Babylonians at the time. He immersed them into this culture where it was assimilation, where they lived and spoke and read and thought and did all of the things that a Babylonian would do. And then he was exclusive, which was very uncompromising, and he changed
Yes.
all of their names that represented the god of Judah.
Right.
He changed
Yes.
them to the names that represented the
Uh-huh.
god of Babylon. And so he was uncompromising, and everybody is when they have a worldview. Nobody is neutral. And so when you look at Nebuchadnezzar's model of discipleship, you can take those three components, intentional, immersive, and exclusive, and you can look how Mao did it in China in early 1900s. You can see
Yeah.
how Adolf Hitler did it with Hitler's Youth. You can see how Stalin did it. Everybody was intentional with who they chose and the time that they chose them, what they immersed them into. I mean, you're talking about curriculum being taken out of Mao's China and little red books being put in their place, propaganda all over the walls, and exclusive. You didn't have a
Yes.
choice but to follow the
Yeah.
ways of Hitler or to follow the ways of Mao. And so when you look at Jesus's great commission, you see the three components of discipleship. He was intentional, go. Where there's a command, there's an intent to follow, an intent to
Absolutely.
give that command. Immersive, baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and
Mhm.
teach them exclusive, my commands, the commands I give to you. Discipleship is not a Christian term. It is a term that applies. I mean, Buddha had disciples, Muhammad had
Right.
disciples.
That's a really
Everybody
good
has a
point.
worldview. Those 2
Yes.
things are very closely linked, and what
Yes.
made Jesus's discipleship program better, and I'll end with this because this is, there's a lot more to that, but what made Jesus's discipleship program better was the 4th component not found in anybody else's, and that's relationship. When you have a relationship, it takes dictatorship out of that whole discipleship model, and it's
I
what
was just
builds the
thinking about
church.
that the other day. So I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Say that
No,
again.
you're fine.
When you put relationship into the model, it does what? It takes
It takes
dictatorship out?
dictatorship out, and
Mm,
the discipleship model that built the church. We're talking about Jesus Christ and his disciples 2,000 years after. We don't talk about Nebuchadnezzar's discipleship model. It died with him. We don't talk about Mao's. We look back and say, God forbid that ever happen again. We look at
right.
his tactics and say, yep, it's propaganda, it's indoctrination. Nobody wants to follow that model. So we look at Jesus's and we say, he where Nebuchadnezzar made you conform to the culture, Jesus transformed you. Where Nebuchadnezzar said, we're going to indoctrinate you, Jesus educates you. Jesus gives you a choice. I'm going to speak in parables so that those who want to know the truth can hear it, and those who don't want to know the truth won't. But either way, it's up to the student to be careful how he hears. And that's what a disciple is. A true follower of Christ says, I want to know, I want to
Yes,
learn, not just
yes,
because I'm a Christian. It's because I want my relationship with the Lord to be strong, and I want to be able to teach others and add
yeah,
disciples to the kingdom. Not it's about converts, but it's also about discipleship. We need to bring
yeah.
discipleship back. And you're 100% right, Lori. Apologetics is the way to do that too.
Yes, absolutely. It totally is because, like you said, I love the point that you made that everybody gets discipled by somebody, and really love the fact that you talked about needing a father because I was just thinking about that in terms of raising children and what the breakdown of the family in the United States has done. Either we are going to be discipled, so to speak, by the police and the federal correction system, or we're going to be discipled by our father, who is going to be much more tender, much more intentional, much more hands-on, much more relational than simply a form of some sort of coercive government. And so I was just thinking about that the other day. I don't know why I was thinking about that, but yes, the idea that worldview discipleship is just part of our growth. I think sometimes people get confused thinking that it has to be evangelism in this compartment and discipleship in this compartment, when really if we just teach discipleship and apologetics all together, evangelism can happen and people can become
Yes.
converted, whether we are making a specific effort at evangelism or just teaching them about Jesus and teaching them about the reality of this world. Because if God is real, which obviously we believe that to be the case, then there is a theological thread that runs through every stitch of the universe. And when we snip those threads, it doesn't actually remove God from existence. All it does is remove us from the love and the kinship and the relationship and the truth and the reality and all the things that matter in this world.
Mhm. Amen. That is
Yeah.
100% true.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, gosh, Shanda, this has been a great conversation. I am so grateful that you're out there doing the work that you're doing, and that you stopped long enough to come to our show and talk to us. And so, thank you very much for kind of being willing to share with us and remind us that we are all, including our children, we're somebody's disciple. So we need to embrace that concept of discipling
Mhm.
one another and discipling our kids, and not forgetting about worldview and apologetics in the process of our discipleship. So, thank you very much for sharing that with us today.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's always a great time spending time with you ladies.
Yeah, you as well. Thank you so much. So, audience, if you would like to learn more about Shanda and her podcast, you can find her website at shandafulbright.com. And you can follow her on social media by searching the handle Shanda Fulbright on Instagram. And while you're at it, you can explore women in apologetics resources. We have articles, videos, social media, quick guides, courses, merchandise, you name it. So, to see what we have available and to donate to the work we do, or just become a part of our Apologetics Collective, just visit our website at apologetics, apologix.com, and we'll see you next time.